Hi everyone, Fresh here, and I'm here to do a little pre-read on an interesting little closed emitter red dot that Nurse showed me recently. This is the new and upcoming Trijicon RCR as of today, which is August 1st. I think this came out sometime last night or premiered early this morning. And Trijicon does have a little bit of information, so let's see if we can look through this thing and see what it's about. So just upon, looking at the top of the web page, it's a 3.25 MOA red dot. There doesn't seem to be any other reticles or any other dot sizes available quite yet. That seems to be, I think, what's okay for pistols out to decent range or a good piggyback candidate for your ACOGs and other prism optics. So let's take a look here. So this thing runs off a 2032 battery, nothing insane there. There's some kind of hexalin wrench that's included. Maybe it's a combination flathead screwdriver used for the windage and elevation here. And there are these interesting little screws. They're called capstans. And the probably most historical use I've seen of capstans is through the use of basically rope pulleys used on sailboats, old ships, and on various docks to get good leverage for tension on roping rigs, essentially. And this concept looks kind of interesting. I think I'll get to that in a moment, but you get these capstan screws, a little torque guide, just some stickers, and Loctite, the kind of the usual stuff. The optic body looks pretty durable. It's looks a little bit like the Steiner MPS. In fact, there's a bit of a conning tower look to this thing with how much the dot itself is inset into the body. The front window is inset into the body itself. If you look through a couple of pictures, there's just a plus and minus button. The usual stuff. You have a top-mounted battery with the penny slot or cartridge slot in it. I think that's pretty straightforward. That's okay. You could see some of the salt on this optic in the pictures, but that's probably for demonstration, maybe done on purpose. I don't know. I'm not going to question any professionalism there. You see the capstan screws on the side. There being 4 of them, which is interesting. Are there spares? Are they going to be mounted in different parts of the body? Is there a cover someplace on this thing where they're hidden? It looks like it's going to be quite interesting here. You got your QR codes. Windage and elevation are kind of in the usual spots. And then the rear window is just a little bit embossed or set into the body itself. But this thing looks like it's built like a tank. Some of the features here that they say multi-platform friendly, no additional plates needed. This is probably interesting because that might be a complaint for a few consumers that there's all these different platforms you need to use. You have MOS, you have the acro footprint. You never seem to have the right length of screws. The screw threads might be a little bit different on some of them. On your piggyback solutions, your full size and concealed carry pistol, there never seems to be something that is universal. I think this is Trigicon's attempt at being able to create this universality in the mounting. And I think it's kind of interesting to do it. I don't know if this is going to be a perfect execution, but I think the attempt to try and do that, I think, is already commendable by them. So let's see how this thing looks like, and what what the execution or issues might be with going with this particular system. So, unique patented mounting system that allows the optic to use the Trijicon RMR footprint. Yeah, I think I think I was wrong here. Most likely, this is just regular RMR, and this is not exactly universal. The screws are going to be roughly in the same spot as before. Let's look at this capstan screw really quick. So what it looks like upon inspection, without seeing any tools on the thing, without watching any videos, you have a channel that's cut in the bottom of the optic. It's kind of inset in. It's pretty deep, and this thing is sort of anchored in via, it's not a dovetail, it's probably a channel with a little bit of a taper, like a countersunk screw, maybe a little bit of an angle or wedge towards the bottom section of the channel. The screws go through and they tension the entire optic assembly down. Now, My problem is I don't see what the bottom of this red dot looks like. Are there recoil lugs supplied? In this case, is there anything to help this thing hold zero? I have no idea. All I know is that these screws probably use some kind of tool or pin to put inside the holes, and you just kind of move them front and back as you tighten them down. It looks like a fairly laborious process. It probably takes a while to screw these things down, to be honest. The thread count is okay. It's not, super fine in that case, but it's probably going to take a little time to, put this thing down into its mount. Honestly, there's probably a sense of ruggedness in using that tool in particular to get that thing going. I can't really blame them for trying this thing out. It does look rugged. My only issue is, down the line, yes, you can use various types of tools. You can use a hex, you can use a pin, you can use a small Watchman screwdriver, and you'd be able to torque this thing down probably fine. But I could see a lot of people kind of monkey wrenching this thing a little bit and absolutely stripping the threads if they're not careful. And probably another second thing to this thing is, I hope this optic is very durable. Because this thing is a ride or die. If you get sand or mud in there and there's water that basically turns that thing into concrete or expands in there somehow, good luck getting that thing out without a strong risk of damaging the outer body of this optic. I hope the optic is very durable because you're going to get holes and gouges on this thing just from torquing it and from getting the mud and sand out in such a way to get this thing going, which is kind of interesting. I suppose if you're able to execute this with a small drill bit and like a little file and hammer, you could clear things out of the way. I may be proven wrong, but so far that seems to be a mud and grime point that is very common conversation piece in the AR-15 and AK-47 communities with the mud tests. So be prepared to see mud tests all over YouTube on this thing when people are getting, or when reviewers are getting this optic through, and you're going to see if you're able to get this once the mud dries or sets, especially sand. Oh, that's another friction modifier right there, isn't it? Now, this is the same deck as the RMR. I would hope so. You have suppressor height iron sights, you have regular height iron sights, lower third, 1/3 co-witness, and everything in between that's available on the market. That doesn't seem to be incredibly surprising. Windage and elevation, I mean, 1 MOA per click. I would have maybe hoped for half MOA, but this, after all, is a typically pistol-mounted micro reflex or red dot sight. So that's not the end of the world. But if you use it for a piggyback and you want to use this out to 300 yards, not everybody's going to be comfortable with that 1 MOA per click. And that was a common criticism that I've gotten on a few videos, and I really can't disagree with that. I think it's okay to have a little bit of precision, especially for people who are good shooters and would be frustrated with, the amount of compensation they would have to have left or right at least. And the optic body on the outside, probably where this durability comes from, much in the same material choice as the ACOG TA31. You have the 7075 T6 aluminum. It's a fairly hard alloy. T6, that's probably the tempering process that they use. There's probably a little bit of heat aging in there, a little cold aging. I could show the spec sheet here. I'll probably just put it on the screen while I'm going through this. But again, pretty durable, good impact resistance, fairly high tensile strength and compressive strength on that aluminum. So I don't think you'll have a problem with the optic body of this thing being able to take impacts as needed. I'm more worried about those screws for other reasons, but if they work, yeah, I would hope that this thing is fairly durable. Again, top-loaded battery. They say 6 years of continuous operation at setting 5. I'll probably put a quick calculation here on what that might look like, but that is kind of vague at the moment. I'll probably give you a quick prediction up on the screen how I got there. Outstanding durability, sure, you could show your ANSYS or SolidWorks FEA up there if you want to, with some kind of point load on it, but the real test is going to come up with the durability testing or various hammers being hit on this thing to see how it holds up, maintains zero, and keeps moisture in particular out of the inside of that closed emitter, causing a lot of fogging and issues that would have to be warrantied, essentially. I mean, the buttons, they look fairly similar to one of the dual fuel RMRs, I believe. You just have I believe it's the minus on the left, plus on the right. It seems kind of typical. That's kind of a nice way to do it. I think maybe some people have analyzed whether or not you want your plus and minus on, both on one side. I don't think this bothers all that much unless a person has dyslexia or some issue like that. But I think that seems pretty fine. I wonder if there's a lock feature to prevent your settings from being bumped. In particular, do you hold one to lock your particular setting and hold the button again to unlock, that kind of thing. Curious if those features with such a large button would be able to make this thing a little bit easier to use and a little bit more robust. A multicolored lens. I'm curious on the light transmission of this thing in particular. I haven't really looked at an RMR yet and compared it to a lot of the RMR copies that HoloSun makes in particular. I really like the glass on those red dots. They have a little bit of lens distortion, I would say, on some of the lower end models. My 50HT did not have very much. The 507 that I tried had less, and this 407 that I currently have on my piggyback mounted on the ACOG has a little bit more. It's not absolutely bothersome, especially under night vision, but it is a little bit more. And then you get the diopter effect if you have glasses and corrected vision and whatnot. And then the MPS, which this thing would compete directly with, as well as the Aimpoint Acro, they probably have a little bit less distortion. I get a tiny bit on my MPS, but just not enough for me to notice under regular use unless I really needed to take a look at it. So I would hope at least the glass redeems itself, or gives potential buyers pause after looking at some of the, let's say, what Trijicon calls unique features on this particular optic. But I don't know. This package may turn out to be okay. It's just those capstan screws are just a little bit distracting at the moment in terms of how well they can be used. I'd be very curious to try one at some point. Trijicon, if you'd like to send me one, I'd absolutely love to take this thing through his paces, both on a pistol and potentially a piggybacked prism. This thing looks really interesting. I like some of the ingenuity that's put into this. I'm a little skeptical at the same time, but I would love you guys to, prove me wrong. Let's look at the street price probably, finally here. I would say, it says $849. My guess is the street price over time will end up being something like $600. That's probably closer to what the Acro will fetch, and maybe what some HoloSun 509 Ts might be fetching. Some of the closed emitter RMR foot or Acro footprint red dots may end up looking like. There are no sensors or fiber optics or any of that stuff to deal with here necessarily, so that price might be fair. I'm just curious how that will retain its value over time with the unique feature sets and how this is going to come out of the gate. Look at some of the footprints here. We'll do a quick comparison here in a second compared to others. Before we close this out, you have your temperature specs that this thing can operate in. Submersion is about 20 meters. This is probably one of the best in class. And I can trust Trijicon actually does meet this pretty well. They do test that stuff. This stuff is military tested and really could make it on in a couple of military branches and in law enforcement, most likely. 3.25 red dot. 2 ounces, probably a little bit heavier than I would have expected, but I think that'll work pretty well. Most people can shrug off that extra weight on their piggyback or on their pistol without too much of an issue. I see 10 bright settings, 1 super bright. That's interesting choice, probably during the daytime. If you needed this thing to be rugged and daytime bright without worrying about certain things, that 1 super bright would be an interesting feature that does expand the feature set. You have your 3 NV as well, so now you have an NV range, a fine brightness range for different distances if you needed to dim it for something like a 50 or 100 yard shot for a full size 9mm, or a super bright to do your short range intuitive and quick work, maybe even for concealed carry if absolutely needed and you need to spot this thing. I'm curious about the window size. They're probably going to give that out at some point, so I'm going to see how that compares with my micro reflex red dot list here. And of course, 2032, 1 MOA per click. There's a couple of new accessories that it seems that Trijicon came out with. And at this point, I think I'm going to close this video out. This is just my initial impressions. I like the construction. I like the top-mounted battery. This thing could be fairly competitive with the Acro, your Acros, your MPSs, your 509Ts. But those capstan screws are kind of sus. But I'd love to test one of these out and see how it goes. So I hope you guys like this video. Give me a like, maybe a subscribe if you like. Ring that bell if you do subscribe. And we'll talk more on this and see if I can get one for myself. I'll see you guys on the range.